But I thought it might be a good idea for me to tell you, first of all, a little bit about how I came to be here. I worked in major museums and galleries, mainly in the UK, for the last 30 or 35 exhibitions. And one of the longest periods that I spent was at the National Portrait Gallery, where I spent 18 years in total. I wanted to leave after 8, but it took me another 10 to find my next job. That's the way it goes. But as well as working on fantastic exhibitions of oil paintings and incredible individuals, I also managed to work with all the major photographers of the time, including Mario Testino, Henri Cartier-Bresson, Annie Leibovitz, Richard Avedon, and Helmut Newton. So it was a wonderful exposure to British culture, really, and some of our greatest living artists of the time. I then went to become director of a little piece of heaven, really, an art gallery called Compton Verney, which is set in the middle of the English countryside. It has 120 acres of Capability Brown designed landscape, and it is a Grade 1 listed building, but attached to it, it has the most beautiful, fit-for-purpose, contemporary architecture designed exhibition space by Stanton Williams, the architect. You can just about make it out in a little corner. And I was there for 4 years, having a wonderful time being lady of the manor, having grounds in which we had sculpture, but we also had a lot of problems with the animals. We had deer, we had rabbits with myxomatosis, we had Canada geese, we had badgers. And I remember at one senior management team meeting with the curators and the deputy director, and the curator at some point put his head in his hands and said, "When will this talk of killing stop?" Because we were always having to manage the animal life. And I think he thought he was there really to do contemporary art shows, but actually sometimes in museums and galleries, it is about the roof or the pipes or whatever. From there, I went back to the Royal Academy of Arts, and I actually started my career at the Royal Academy in about 1985, but I went back there as artistic director in 2009. And it was really, really a special place to have what I think are probably the best galleries in Europe to play in and to make exhibitions in. But also, with that sort of an institution, yes, you can do major exhibitions like the Anselm Kiefer retrospective that I mounted, but you can also, you have a responsibility, I believe, to broaden the canon of the art and the artists that you actually show. And for me, I think it's always, it's easy to do the Monets, the Manets, the Velasquez, the Rembrandt exhibitions. Not so easy to borrow the works anymore, but it's easy to do them. It's harder to push the boundaries, to bring new artists, or artists that should be in the canon already in. And it's one of the reasons why when I was at the Royal Academy, I mounted an exhibition on Australian art. And the reason why I did it was because when I was at Compton Verney, there was a particular female Australian artist who I wanted to do an exhibition of. And that same curator who was distressed about the killing of animals said to me, "Well, we can't do that exhibition, Kathleen." And I was like, "Well, why not?" He said, "Well, no one's heard of this person, and no one will buy a ticket to come and see the exhibition." And for an independent museum that relied heavily on ticketed income, I, as a director, couldn't take that risk. So when I came to the Royal Academy, I thought, if there's going to be an exhibition on Australian art, this is the place to do it. Because in 5 years' time, a smaller museum like Compton Verney Art Gallery might want to do that same female artist I wanted to do. And when the curator said to them, "You can't do this project because no one will have heard of the artist," the curator could say, "Ah, no, that artist was in the show at the Royal Academy." So I do think that there have been a number of shows that happened after this in Europe and across the UK that I think this show enabled. And it would be a little bit arrogant of me to suggest that the Tate acquisition of Australian art, not so recently, was also sort of, I think, slightly on the back of the work that we did here. But it all builds. But that's also what took me to, when I left the Royal Academy in 2014, I wanted to carry on doing that work. And I'd been talking to the director of Dulwich Picture Gallery about a Norwegian artist called Harald Solberg. Harald Solberg's an artist that people don't really know, but he was number 2 really to Munch, another symbolist artist essentially. And we did that exhibition, but what it then meant after its success was that a lot of people came to me with their artists who should be known better in the UK but aren't. And actually that's when Čiurlionis was put in front of me for the first time. And I have to credit the bravery of the director at Dulwich Picture Gallery, because many museums and galleries, especially independent museums that don't get big amounts of funding from the government or from the Arts Council, they have to put on exhibitions that they know people will buy tickets to. But the director of Dulwich Picture Gallery, much like the director here, is prepared to take those risks in order to expand our knowledge and understanding of art and art history. So here we are, hanging your great Rex at Dulwich Picture Gallery. I think it was a really interesting time to make this show. I felt that it was the right time because there'd been a number of exhibitions in the UK and in America at the time that focused on artists that sat on the edges of spirituality and had lots of sort of questions about religion and life and God. There'd been a very successful Hilma af Klint exhibition. There was also a very successful Emma Kuntz exhibition. And I felt that Čiurlionis would sit in amongst that. I mean, as well as seeing the work and also realizing the quality of it and the fact that it needed to be better known. But what I didn't know, I was always unsure how the exhibition would land in London. I thought it could either be a huge success or it's just not going to fly. But it took off enormously. And I think not just with the normal visitors, but also with a lot of the gamers and the people who are interested in science fiction or space fantasy. And what we found at the weekends is the traditional museum audience would change, and there'd be people with long black leather coats and big leather boots with soles. So it was really interesting to see that change. One of the critics who wrote about the exhibition mentioned that the launch of the exhibition in London coincided with the launch of the new Lord of the Rings film. So there was a sense of the timing sort of worked very, very well. But what that did do, this exhibition, was it cemented relationships. And those of you who work in exhibitions and museums will know that relationships are right at the heart of allowing you to do what you do when you make shows. And of course, having that good relationship with the gallery here meant that I could come back or be invited back to work with the team. This is the team. Oh no, that's the young one. This is the team that I have been working with. Greta, who you just met, and Viva. Viva I worked very closely with on the Dulwich Picture Gallery show, but Greta was new to me. Sort of a strange, young, bright person who, when the director of the museum introduced me to her, she said she's got this idea. She's got this idea of looking at science, and she wants science to be part of looking at Čiurlionis. She thinks about the cosmos and the sea. We should maybe focus on that. And I thought, well, that's great. That's a great idea, and it felt right to take a slice across Čiurlionis's work rather than continuing to tell the stories that we've been telling for many, many times. So when I first sat down with Greta, being brought in to support them in the curatorial work, my first question was, so, which artists are you thinking of including in this exhibition? And she just said, I don't know, you do art. So I was like, great, I get to play. I get to think about all the wonderful artists that I want to bring in to this project. But of course, it wasn't long before this very, very bright spark started doing the art as well. And then I had to sort of use my elbows to sort of get her out of the way slightly. But it was fun all the way. But as I said, the reason why Greta was really, really keen to make this exhibition sort of have a science element to it, weaving throughout it, is because I think she was really concerned about the audiences that would come to the exhibition. She wanted people who wouldn't normally come to see an art exhibition. So that meant having iPads in the show. That meant having photographs of the pillars of creation or an asteroid and telescopes and things like that. And I think she was proved right. And I mentioned last night in my speech that working with the technicians when we were hanging the show, they've hung many exhibitions and were not really paying very much attention to any of the wonderful art that we were putting up. But the minute we brought out a sextant or a telescope, they were like, oh my goodness, the mechanics, how complicated, how interesting. So I think, credit to her, it actually worked. And as you saw, sneak preview, we did have a helper. This is Greta's youngest. Not only does she have 2 children, one of which she sort of created during the creation of the show, but also has about 3 degrees, sings in a choir, is writing, I think, another MA thesis or something. So you need to be afraid of this woman, is what I would say. So this link with science was very much it was linked very much to the photograph on your right-hand side, the pillars of creation, and this sense that Čiurlionis was somehow, particularly in Sonata of the Sun, creating images and shapes that resonated very much, as if he almost knew the astronomy that was out there. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about the design of the exhibition. I mean, we knew that we wanted to focus on the sea and the cosmos, and the reason why we wanted to do that as a thematic show was we understood that the concerns around the sea and the cosmos are still central to artists working today, and to create a thematic exhibition that would allow us to bring in contemporary artists and also artists from Čiurlionis' time needed to have that level of rigorous focus. But of course, when you're making an exhibition, one of the things that you do first of all is you have to understand the architecture of the space that you're working in and how the show might flow. Because every exhibition needs a rhythm and a pace. You're thinking about the visitor when they will encounter certain moments, how you lift their spirits after they've turned a corner and feel like they've just absorbed one bit of information. What's the next thing that's going to lift them? So working with the space upstairs, we very, very quickly set upon the design that we wanted and the layout. And you can see here, I think this is a sketch I did on a very early visit, that Miguel Rothschild's wonderful sea hanging piece is exactly where we thought it would be right at the beginning of the exhibition. And then you would move through into the sea. You know, we were very good. We even put the text up. I mean, normally, don't you think people forget the text, Julia? They forget it. They don't leave space, but we left space for the text right from the start. And we worked with that architecture, understanding that we had this sort of U-shape to deal with the sea on one side, and then we would travel up to the cosmos. And actually, those of you listening to Emilia, it was very interesting to hear her also talk about that journey in her work consistently, although she does it mainly in the opposite direction. But you know, it's all about the storytelling. And then we had to work out, how do we get people from the sea to the cosmos? And we had this fantastic corridor that we decided would be the navigation corridor that would allow people to be transported from the depths up to the heights. Oh, I've done it again. No. So knowing that we wanted Miguel right at the start of the exhibition, it's very important, I feel, that you have these moments of real drama, especially when you walk into a space. And Miguel's provided just that, although I don't think any of us realized just how long it was going to take to install. I don't know if Miguel's not here. Oh, he is, Miguel is here, hello. So I understand you went to the sauna the other day, Miguel, for your back, this poor man's back. How many days? 8 days? 8 days, and about 20 or 30 helpers sewing with needles, fishing wire going up to the ceiling. I mean, it was a huge, huge enterprise, but I think you'd all agree that you know, it has that dramatic effect as you come up the stairs. On the selection itself, we made it, you know, as all curators do, it was a combination of what we already knew, artists that we already knew, but also Instagram these days. You know, I used to think it was horrible in the 80s and 90s when curators I knew just made exhibitions from looking at books. But it's not unheard of today. You know, people use Instagram. That's where you find inspiration. But also we were working a lot with you know, exhibition catalogues and our understanding of artists who have, you know, really interrogated these sorts of themes over the years. And then you can see here, I just wanted to reinforce this idea of the design and the layout that we came up with right at the very start. And you'll see it's pretty much stayed exactly as it has. We did, in fact, though, make one mistake, but we probably made quite a few mistakes, but I'm going to admit to one. We selected an exhibition that would have filled about 20 museums and galleries, and we were determined to have all these works in. But of course, once we did an actual space exercise and hung the works, in theory, on paper or on screen, we realized that we were going to have to cut at least half of it back, and that was the most painful thing, I think, to do. But that's the beauty of a thematic show. You can make it many, many times over. What was important for us, though, was Čiurlionis really needed to be the anchor in every section of the exhibition. We really hung everything around those works, because ultimately the purpose of doing this show was to get people to look at Čiurlionis again. Lithuanians know him. They know him well. They studied him at school. But I'd say that you know him so well that you sort of don't know him, because you stop looking at something when it's really, really familiar. So what we were trying to do here is to sort of put that little jar in, that thing that sort of stops you and makes you go, okay, I need to look at this and understand it in a different way. And to also understand the way in which his thinking is still resonating with artists today. And we also wanted to emphasize context. You know, it's easy to look at an artist in isolation and not understand the world that they're living in at the time. Yes, his was a world without iPhones, without social media. It was a time of learning, of salons, of talking, of cultural, you know, endeavors. But it was also hugely influenced by other artists. You know, he did travel. He traveled to the museums in Munich and Vienna. He was inspired by a lot of the work that was being done by his contemporaries at the time. And of course, very inspired, as were many artists at this period, and especially the symbolist artists, where he would sit with, by Japanese ukiyo-e woodcut painting, printmaking. And we're very lucky to have two at the moment on show, prints by Hiroshige, actually, rather than Hokusai, that actually came from a collection that was shown in Warsaw while Čiurlionis was actually studying in Warsaw. So there's a very, very good chance that he actually saw the prints that are hanging on the wall and that you are able to look at today. In the Jurata section, it was always very important that the presence of amber was felt. I can tell, is the director of the museum in here? No, good. I can tell you, she spent 2 days trying to fix this case. 2 days. We had so much amber in the room, and at one point I went by and there were about 15 necklaces in there, and it looked like they were all nooses to hang people by. And then as I walked past, I thought, they look like sausages hanging, drying sausages. And the director, 10 minutes later, she came, I've changed it. And I said, but why? She said, it looked like a sausage shop. So now I think we have a far more elegant display, but the gestation of that was particularly interesting. Jurata, of course, was a favourite. It was lovely for me to learn more about the myth as well, and to understand how much it's sort of deeply part of Lithuanian psyche, you know, the association with independence and occupation as well. It's been very interesting for me to learn more about it. But I would also say that for me it's about the mermaids. I've always had an obsession about mermaids. I've long wanted to make an exhibition about mermaids, but I think one day it will happen. But that, of course, took me to Emilia Scarnolita, who I met in Naples. I was introduced to her by the cultural attaché to London at the time, and I happened to be in Naples at the same time as Emilia. And we had many very raucous nights, and one of them, we ended up, both of us, in the inside of a wine barrel in one. So we had, right from the start, I sort of knew that Emilia was going to be a kindred spirit, and while she may no longer be a mermaid and is more of a snake at the moment, she's still as crazy as we know and love her and need her to be in making her wonderful work. And of course, in the Jurata section, we have Čiurlionis really sort of standing proud. And you'll have noticed, I hope, that where Čiurlionis sits in the exhibition, we always have a lovely dark blue colour that sort of emphasises him in particular. And there is one space where he's not on a dark blue colour, and if any of you come with your children, I encourage you to get them to find it as a mission when they visit. Also have the Estonian artist Konrad Mägi in the show. And Konrad Mägi is going to be the next exhibition that I make for Dulwich Picture Gallery in 2026. And he, like Čiurlionis, is not really known outside of Estonia, but is celebrated very much as one of their most important artists. So I'm hoping to do the same with him as we did with Čiurlionis when he came. But the wonderful thing about going to Estonia last year to visit and learn more about him was that I actually got to meet Kristina Olek. And Kristina is in the room. I've seen her somewhere at the back. There she is. We went on a range of studio visits, because what I like to do when I do these exhibitions at Dulwich Picture Gallery is in the central space to have a contemporary artist make something in response to that historical exhibition that we've got on. And the minute I saw Kristina's work, which is all about the Baltic Sea, which is where Konrad Mägi was based, which is really touching on contemporary issues around the seas and climate change, the deprivation of oxygen in the waters, the slow-moving nature of the waters that means that you have these dead zones, also very related to the work that Emilia does. It felt very, very important that Kristina should feature in my Konrad Mägi show. But when I saw the work and learnt more about it, I just thought, my goodness, she's a perfect fit for this exhibition here, because her concerns, her worries, her considerations are very, very close to Čiurlionis. And you'll see from where she's placed in the exhibition, that's also very, very intentional. The fact that you're sort of lulled into this false sense of security with those Čiurlionis oil sketches at the very beginning, and then you're sort of smacked in the face by this acidic, rusting, salted, very, very contemporary art piece in the next space. I have to say, securing loans for the exhibition was difficult. It's getting harder and harder to get good, famous paintings out of big institutions, partly because they want them in their own institutions themselves for their local audiences, and they're working with them, but also because these works are greatly in demand and they have to travel the world on a regular basis, so get booked up, but also because of the fragility of the work. So Leon Spilier, the Belgian artist, also worked mainly in tempera and pastel, very like Čiurlionis. So the works are vulnerable, very, very fragile. But we knew we had to include him because he's so like Čiurlionis. You know, he was quite a depressed character, very solitary, couldn't sleep at night, would go on these long walks, just like Čiurlionis as well. And his paintings are full of desolation and emptiness and this big silence. So to have him in the exhibition was absolutely crucial. And we spent a long time fighting to get a work. And in the end, I'm very happy that this private collection actually lent it to us. And this is one of my favourite sections of the exhibition, because that Spilier is sitting next to the painting on the right-hand side, which is by Tomas Stabrauskas, who was actually Čiurlionis's teacher. And you'll see real similarities in the style and the approach in the work on the right-hand side in particular. But we also sort of go back to Japan. You know, this strange artist who painted in the Western tradition actually came to Paris to train, then went back to Japan and set up a Western-style sort of painting union, but still very, very connected to symbolism movement going on back here across Europe. So that range of style was important to include. Oh, that's in the wrong place. Let's go to Brett instead. So John Brett was an important loan that we managed to receive from Tate in London. And Brett was really important because he was on the edges of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood movement. So very connected to John Ruskin. And this was a time, you know, when Charles Darwin had published his Origin of the Species in 1859. You know, people had turned away from this idea of God. The whole idea of where we came from meant that everyone was turning back to nature. They were looking at geology, they were looking at plant life, they were trying to understand the mechanics, the biology of how we might come to be. So Brett was particularly interested in that, but what makes him interesting to us is that he was also fascinated by astronomy, and he was actually a member of the Royal Astronomical Society in London and regularly wrote papers on the subject. So, the artists that we've got in the exhibition are sort of immersed in both the scientific and the artistic on a number of occasions. And this is a very large painting, sort of big in scale. As the curator said to me when we were talking about it, it's got a lot of wall power. So of course we had to put it in a position where you can sort of feel that wall power. But alongside it, I put this very quiet little painting by Andreas Dirks, because essentially they're both trying to do something very, very similar with that reflection of light. Just anecdotally, whenever I'm driving and you see that level of light in the sky, I always think that, God is in the sky. And there's something very, very sort of spiritual and uplifting about it. And there's something about scale in this exhibition. We go from very, very large works to very, very small, but all of them are containing big ideas. They're all monumental in their own way. Then we have this continued fascination with the sea, with Via Selmens, for example. And interestingly, when I was looking at one of Emilia's films in the lecture theatre just now, it was so reminiscent in the right-hand side of Via's work. That sort of intense focus on something that's so small but so statuesque at the same time, and the fact that this is an engraving, an etching rather than a photograph, and just elegant in its simplicity and strong in its sort of quietness. I mean, she left Latvia when she was, I think, about 8 or 9 and moved to Indianapolis in America. And her first love was really pop art. She was very influenced by that. So it's incredible to think about the work that she makes today and what she's really known for. It's a million miles away from it. But she's also in another of my favourite sections in the exhibition. And it's a little wall that focuses on women artists. And Cécile de Cohn, who's a Belgian artist, we're fascinated by this really, but I'm particularly taken by the biography on her, which I didn't read before the book was published, I will admit. And the biographies were written by some of our colleagues here at the museum. And it's a fantastic biography, and it tells the story about how Cécile worked for the family business run by her brothers and her fathers, which was painting furniture. And there's a lot of information about her brothers and her father, and very little about Cécile, which sort of just reinforces the point yet again. Where is the information that we should be hearing about these female artists? But I haven't actually seen any of the furniture she painted, but I doubt that it looked like this. And I imagine this, when she's making art for herself, was where she found her real expression. One of the other things that I managed to do here was to rummage a lot in the stores, and I think finding this, Clara, came as a surprise even to the museum itself, and I think they're now very excited by the fact that they've got quite a few. This wonderful artist who was born in Berlin, but she couldn't train as an artist in Berlin because at the time they didn't accept female artists. So she then went to Paris, where she studied art, eventually returning to Hiddensee, one of the German islands, which was known as an artist colony. And she established a women's union of artists on that island herself. And sadly died in 1942 in a German concentration camp. But lovely little stories like that, lovely artists that we wouldn't otherwise look at. Other important institutional loans that we managed to secure was this Strindberg from the Musée d'Orsay. Like Čiurlionis, again, like many of the other artists, he was a polymath, a writer, a painter, but filled with inner turmoil and very, very immersed in politics. At the end of this section of the exhibition, again, we have Čiurlionis as the anchor. This is the first moment. I mean, okay, it's a bit literal, but we introduce a ship, okay? And the ship is going to take you across to the cosmos. But this is the first moment where you really sort of encounter the mechanism for traveling across from the depths of the sea to the stars. And it was really this photograph that we found of Čiurlionis on a boat that inspired this section. And it was very important to us in that section to divide it into the travel across the sea and up into the cosmos itself. And you start with this painting, which is loaded with symbolism. You know, it's Charon taking the souls across the river Styx from one world to another, which is exactly the journey that us as visitors to the exhibition are about to take on. Oh, and there's that very compass that many of you will have seen upstairs, but it's the one that the art handlers really sort of enjoyed playing with. We talked a lot at the beginning of thinking about this exhibition about the way in which the stars were used. You know, the fact that the stars, sailors use the stars to guide themselves across the seas, that connection between heaven and earth, the fact that we would look at solar eclipses in puddles on the floor, you know, that joining together of those two worlds. And for those of you who've seen the exhibition, you will no doubt have been blown away by one of Mariela Neudecker's, Mariela is over there, I can see her, wave, tanks. Mariela and I have worked together many times. She, in fact, had made a contemporary intervention at Dulwich Picture Gallery the last time I did a project there. And Mariela's work speaks to many of the key points in this exhibition. You know, she has explored the depths of the sea and, you know, talks about how it doesn't matter how deep you go in the mid-Atlantic ridge, you will still find a remnant of human existence. There will be a bottle top or a plastic glove or something, or you can go to the Arctic. Was it Wi-Fi that you got in the Arctic at one point?
I tried to get away from it.
Yeah, you tried to get away from it.
I did, in places.
In places, but you know that idea of a human presence just constantly being there. It's never really absent. We have managed to touch and lay our hands on everything in some way. But I also love these works because they speak of the sublime, and the whole idea of the sublime, which was based on a treatise written by Edmund Burke at the time, was about the drama, grandeur, the awe-inspiring nature, the monumentality of it. And you know, as I said earlier, this is about trying to use nature to understand where we came from, because God had sort of gone. And we know that Čiurlionis, in his explorations through theosophy and Indian religions, you know, he was trying to do the same himself. In this section, we have two paintings by Čiurlionis of ships, but three actually. And you can see here that, again, it's a little bit literal, but you know, allow us our curatorial games. The boats are no longer just on the water. They are starting to rise into the air to take us towards where we're finally going. And then the final work in that section is actually Čiurlionis's final work as well, Ships. And you'll see, if you look at it, that it's actually floating above the land. It's not in the water at all. So we're now moving towards the heavenly, really. And of course, you've got the symbols. You've got the triangle, the circle, and the square, sort of allusions to religion and spirituality. The minute we knew at this point that what we really needed was a Paul Signac painting, because we wanted to talk about pointillism and the relationship with impressionism as well. But it was very, very difficult to secure a loan of that level. So we'd decided that we didn't need it and we'd be perfectly fine. And then when Miguel came on a research visit to talk about the installation of his work, he brought some of his catalogues and we were looking through them. And we found his... Oh yeah, like the Signacs. We found his wonderful, we can ignore the Signacs, we didn't get them. So instead we found this marvellous work, which is basically a Signac, which Miguel is working with a photograph, a poster image of exactly the same size as the Signac, but has used a hole puncher to actually replicate the idea and the sense of the pointillism itself. So we thought that was a much better work to have alongside Ships than Signac. I'm sure you'll agree. And then we start to really sort of travel to the cosmos at this point, and it felt that the Georges Méliès film, that took a really long 3 months to make at the time, was a really important sort of artistic reference point to have in the exhibition too. Not least of all because this film has gone on to inspire so many artists, not just William Kentridge, but I think it even featured in The Simpsons. You know, so it's become a very, very seminal film. It's probably the first science fiction film that was ever made. And what we need to remember about this time is that this is when artists were reading Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. They were reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So it was all this idea of science fiction and science fantasy and exploration and travel to other countries was, other worlds was becoming a big issue. Which is why Katie Patterson's work, an artist, a Scottish artist who's so fascinated by the idea of deep time, was really important to include. And we decided to show this piece because it's the Vivaldi's Four Seasons, but played and listened to, if you so choose, at exactly the same speed at which the Earth itself is turning. So again, that connection between where we are and what we're on, and what we are doing. But of course, oh, you see now, you have to imagine Kiefer, who was a little way back. This is where Kiefer should be. But Kiefer was the artist who, because I did his big retrospective at the Royal Academy in 2014, he's really asked those big questions in life. Who am I? What am I here to do? Why am I here? And he's explored, just like Čiurlionis, theosophy, Indian religion, Kabbalah. He's really sort of got into all of that through literature, through poetry, always trying to explore and understand. So Kiefer was very, very important to have at this point in the exhibition as someone who is on Earth, but is always sort of looking at the stars and trying to understand. Oh God, right, I forgot Joe, sorry, I haven't forgotten you. Half of Semiconductor here in the audience today. It's marvellous to have Joe with us. Again, I've worked with Semiconductor once before, and what they're interested in is this fantastic combination of artists who work very closely with scientists. Now, I think we've got into the habit of thinking that art is this nice soft option over here. It makes people feel good, it makes them feel nice. But we forget that actually artists and scientists have always worked very, very closely together. And Joe and Semiconductor are exactly an example of where this works particularly well. So in the piece Brilliant Noise, which is in the exhibition upstairs, which is essentially looking at the movement of energy around the sun, Semiconductor are working with scientific data and translating it into a sort of visual effect, an artistic work that working alongside scientists doing it. Now, I think Joe, Semiconductor, Marila, Kiefer have all been to visit CERN, where the Large Hadron Collider lives. And in fact, I took Anselm Kiefer there because having worked with him, very wealthy, very established, highly successful artist, I thought, what can you give an artist that they can't possibly get themselves? And I thought, I know, I'll give him the Higgs boson. I'll take him to the Hadron Collider. And he was completely blown away by the scale of it. And this is a man who works on a big scale. He could not get over the enormous size of this instrument that is trying to understand the secrets of the universe. And he spent a whole day talking to scientists about string theory, and those conversations on that one day went on to inform a whole new body of work. The other new commission, apart from Emilia's new film, was a piece by Tanya Kovacs. Tanya had made a beautiful series of painted moons, which we were keen to include in the exhibition, but unfortunately they weren't available. So we then started a conversation about the year of Čiurlionis's birth, and Tanya suggested that she could paint the full moons that would have risen in his birth year. So it's a commission from the museum. Wonderfully, this will now enter the Čiurlionis Museum's collection and sit alongside Čiurlionis himself. So that's something I think we're all very, very proud of. This wonderful shovel for the universe by Jiří Kolar, the Czech artist and poet, was a particular surprise to me, because when we made the request, you know, and we were talking about including it, and we had images on our PowerPoint, I was absolutely convinced it was about this size. And then when I saw the design for the showcase, I said, no, you've got it wrong. And you were like, no, it's this big. So I think often you sort of get in your head that you're working with something in a particular size, but then you do get a surprise. But this also worked the other way around for me, because I had no idea that satellites were this size. I imagined that they were these enormous pieces that would sit floating around in space. So, you know, we're all learning. In that big room where you have the Keith Tyson, the Hablik, and the Anselm Kiefer, it is very, very grand and loud. But ironically, the most important work in that room is this small engraving in the book by Camille Flammarion. Now, Flammarion was a French 19th century astronomer who really popularized astronomy in his day. He published over 70 books in his lifetime on the subject. You have to remember that back then, science was incredibly popular. There were hundreds of weekly journals on the subject that people were interested in, and also every newspaper would feature articles on science. But Camille Flammarion's engraving here, where you see the monk crawling along earth and sticking his head between this membrane, between heaven and earth, between earth and the celestial, it actually sort of summed up really what we were trying to look at and what Čiurlionis was looking at in this exhibition. Flammarion's been very, very influential on Kiefer as well. As many artists, as well as many other artists. We wanted books to have a place in the exhibition, which is why we've also got copies that would have been contemporary to Čiurlionis of books like Darwin's Origin of the Species, Immanuel Kant, and Laplace. So it was, you know, it was important to have that sort of sense of the literature that they would have been reading. Emilia used that Flammarion engraving in the work, in Sophia, the work that she's created for this exhibition, but you would have heard her talk about this small ink drawing of Rex that she also included. And I think she was particularly surprised when she realized that she had to do very little work in adjusting the image in order to fit it into the spherical shape that she's given us in the planet of Sophia that she's created for this exhibition. And I think it's largely because Rex, both in the painting and in the drawing, almost sort of rotates and moves on its own anyway. It has that sort of sense of movement, which I think also goes back to tying in to the musicality that's so often associated with Čiurlionis and his painting. What isn't in the exhibition at the moment, but will come in July, is a number of works by William Blake, which are coming from the British Museum. Because of their sensitivity, they can only be shown for 3 months at a time, but it gives you a good reason to come back. I mean, this 18th century British Romantic poet and artist has often been put in parallel with Čiurlionis, partly because they had lots of shared interests. You know, they had this idea of an all-powerful force that would encompass good and evil. They were both very spiritual, interested in the mystical, in religion and man's place on earth. And they both created paintings that were very visionary, but also sort of highly personal in nature. And of course, they both suffered with their mental health. And this is the third Blake piece that will come to the exhibition as well, The Female Souls. And the idea of the soul is something that we see regularly in Čiurlionis's work. You know, it might be the bird, it might be the stars in the sky. You know, you have to remember, in Lithuanian mythology, the stars are where the souls will travel to, and Milky Way, I think, is translated as the way of the birds. So, you know, all that sort of iconography is in there. So it's lovely to have this piece coming soon. And then, of course, we end the exhibition. We always knew that the end had to be creation of the world. We sort of deliberated about whether it was going to be about the idea of origins, or the idea of a great creator, a great being. And we played around with that a lot, but at the end it was obvious that it had to be creation of the world. Now, there are many different ways you can hang. Well, there aren't many different ways you can hang creation of the world. There is a sequence. This is how I hung them at Dulwich Picture Gallery, one above the other. But Viva, who is the other curator who worked on the project with us, had long held a dream because when she lent the Čiurlionis works to the Musée d'Orsay back in 2002 or whenever, they were shown on a curve. This is a bad photo of the whole space, but essentially we built this for Viva because she needed to feel that she had a curve for creation of the world at the end of the exhibition. So I'm going to finish here with Keith Tyson, because Keith, he talks an awful lot about how artists and scientists are very similar because they're both knowledge seekers. And I've got the quote from him, which, he says, "Art is a vehicle of inquiry, and the role of the artists is much more like that of Christopher Columbus. We are navigators and discoverers of what is already out there in the world, but has yet to be discovered." So I hope that all of you discover something new in Čiurlionis through this exhibition as well. We certainly did in the making. And thank you very much. Thank you.